Good evening. This is Adrenaline Radio, AM 1680 on your dial. You're listening to Adrenaline Motorsports. I'm your host, Fred Blanchard, and we're here tonight with a special guest. It's basically related to, our motorsports industry. We have Mr. Ed Eskandarian, primarily in the cam business since 1946. And he has got a lot of interesting stories that we're going to review this evening. And one of the things that I was very curious about in this interview that we're going to have, Ed, I'd like to find out how you got started in the cam business. I'm really curious about that. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit of how it got started. Was it right after you got out of the service?
Yes, it was right after I got out of the service in 1946. We wanted to start racing our hot rods or gow jobs up at the dry lakes because that was a lot of fun. But because before the war, well, in the early days there, when we were about 1933, I was about 12 years old, and we'd riding bicycles, and every once in a while you'd see a little cut-down car go by. They called them gow jobs. Probably it came from the word get up and go, and that became gow. And later on, after the war, they called them hot rods. So before the war, they also called them hot iron, And so we found out where that fella lived finally, one of the fellas that had one of those gow jobs. And we'd go over to his house, and we could see it and standing still, and he'd explain it to us what he had done. He had cut down a Model T Ford and took everything off he didn't need and made it nice and light, and no fenders and not much body, and he'd even hop up the motor a little bit, and told us about Ed Winfield, who was the foremost expert in about camshafts and racing motors.
Was he one of your mentors when starting out in the cam business, Ed?
Yes, he was. Later on, when I built I had kind of junky hot gow jobs at first, of course, and I'd get a little more experience. But later on, I had to have him grind me a cam, and he took interest in me a little bit and let me see how he made his cam grinder. It was a rocker bar attachment that it rocked to and fro from the grinding wheel, controlled by a master cam, and I was fascinated by how it worked. And
well, did you take any of vocational training while you were in high school, Ed?
Oh yeah, we loved anything in machine shop or even wood shop, whatever we could get in mechanic shops. So and we had a little gow job. We drive to school in there, and I noticed that we had a few guys that hung around the car and liked it, and I didn't realize it, but there was a lot of people that were afraid to come around. And nowadays they are interested in their hot rods, and they're reliving their childhood and getting one now that they have the money to build one or to have one built.
Did you go to high school in the L.A. area, Ed?
Yeah, Poly High first, because they had the greatest machine shops there.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you meet any interesting people during that time that you were going to school? Did you have any buddies that took the same interest that you had?
Oh, yeah. John Athen, of course, was there, and other guys. A guy we called Lead Piston Pete, who was Robbins was his last name. What was his first name? I don't know. Yeah, a lot of the old hot rodders were there.
Well, I got to say, Ed, that you have a lot of history in regards to this, and you mentioned that Ed Winfield was one of your mentors, and you had a chance to learn a little bit from him. During that time, where did you finally start grinding cams? Where was that at?
Well, when I got out of the Army after World War II in 1946, I thought, gee, I'd like to. Winfield was very looked up to, you know, because he knew everything there was to know. And cam grinding, was a kind of a respected thing. You really have to know your stuff to be a cam grinder. But I wanted to, so I went to an auction, and for $700 I bought a cylindrical grinder, which I converted to a cam grinder with that rocking bar attachment. Yeah, so and I start playing around. I read a little bit about cams in the books, and I thought, well, I'll lay out my first cam. It's very simple. I'll probably throw this away. This is just practicing.
What kind of a motor was it for, Ed?
Oh, with a flathead Ford V8, 32 to about 54 they were used. That was the most popular naturally fast car on the road in those days.
Well, let me ask you this. Once you got these cams ground, I don't know how many you were making at the time, but where did you get to use them at? I mean, did you have people that you wanted to sell them to, or how did that go? How did that come about?
Well, this first cam, I said, well, it looks pretty good. It doesn't have any clearance ramps on it, and it's very fast action, and I don't know what'll happen if we put this in a motor, but I think I'll make a few. I'll grind all 16 lobes on this flathead cam, and I'll take them to speed shops and see if they'll buy them. Well, Carl Orr in Culver City bought one or two, but the other shop said, well, you couldn't know nothing about cams. You're just a kid that raced up at the dry lakes. And we learned about the dry lakes from that fellow that we saw his hot rod in front of his house. He told us about the dry lakes. And what's that? He said, well, they're wet in the winter and dry out in the summer, and they're flat as a pancake, and they're 100 miles from Los Angeles, Muroc Dry Lake.
How'd you get there? I mean, did you have...
yeah, we'd ride up with someone and have $1 or $2 and a little lunch, and we'd get up there in the middle of the night and didn't realize it's going to be so cold. Wish we would have brought a lot of blankets. And boy, that was exciting to get there, because there's hundreds of these gow jobs, and some guys, instead of sleeping, they're starting up their cars and even going across the lake in the dark, the dry lake in the dark. It was dangerous, but it was very exciting. And then when daylight came, and it got warm and it's hot, it was wonderful just to see the way different people had fixed up the cars to suit themselves, modified these cars.
Any clubs or anything that you belonged to during that time, or is it just everybody they all came just to be there, or what was that all about at that time?
Well, I was in the neighborhood of the bung holders. They had hot riders and this road rebels, this and that, but
so they had all kinds of fancy names during those days, huh?
That's right, yeah.